Hello and welcome to Sonder, my journal where I come on YouTube and talk about my life. What is this? Um, my name is Maggie. I am a knitter, sewist, bibliophile, and new doctor here in Denver, Colorado. And today I'm going to talk about all of the amazing books that I read in June of 2020. What a world. What a world, my friends. Yeah, right now in June of 2020, right now it's currently July 3rd of 2020, and June was a dumpster fire, but hopefully also a time of change. So maybe it's not a dumpster fire, maybe it's just feels really scary. Yeah, what a world we live in. I don't even know where to begin. I guess what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what is happening in my life in June, and then I'm going to get into some of the books that I want to read. So, if you don't give a fuck about what's going on in my life, then I will put a timestamp down here so that you can skip on to hearing about the books that I've been reading. So, I bring up what's going on in my life because I feel like the books that I read are very much dictated by what I'm feeling, how things are going, what I want to learn about, what I'm realizing that I am super ignorant about, and thus trying to read more on that subject. So, the world is on fire. There is a pandemic going on. I have seen patients firsthand who are suffering from the aftermath that is what the COVID-19 virus can do to your body. So please, please wear a mask. On top of the pandemic that's happening in the world, police continue to murder people, seemingly without any consequences. And people are sick of it and are going to the streets to try to make change. And I myself have also been involved in the protests. And it goes without saying that Black Lives Matter and that Black lives have continuously been hurt by the white race. There's no other way to put it. So I, a long time ago, really wanted to broaden the things that I'm reading, but what I'm realizing even more is that that work needs to keep happening, and we need to keep educating ourselves and reading stories, both happy and sad, about a variety of different people. On top of all of that, it is also Pride Month, and I come from a family that is very interesting because my grandfather was gay, and he was gay at a time where it was like very not okay to be gay and had to get electric convulsive therapy and really tried to pray the gay away and all of these really terrible things that are completely absurd now, but were completely normal in the 1950s. And so Pride Month is something that's really important to me. And so for my reading in June, I really wanted to focus on pride. I really wanted to focus on own voices, stories about people of color, and also read some other things in there as well. And I think that it's also important to note that while that was generally my focus this month, I think it's really important to read diverse stories even when it isn't like in vogue. And so that's not something that will change. So in June, so I started my residency about halfway through June, and so I read a lot of books this month, and a lot more books than I anticipate I will read in the coming years. My goal as of right now, and I only bring this up because the whole point of Sonder is to hold me accountable to continue doing the things that bring me joy, and one of those things is reading. And my goal really is to read one book a week. So my goal in general going forward will be to read about 4 books a month. I love to read a variety of different books. I would say my favorite genres are like literary fiction / contemporary. I like some historical fiction. I love sci-fi, fantasy. I really like a good thriller, horror, and I occasionally like a memoir. I will say, in general, I almost never read nonfiction because I spend my entire day reading nonfiction at work, and don't really care about memoirs unless they are a story that I think is really important for me to learn about and are written really well. I think the thing that really bothers me about memoirs in general is like, normally it's someone who like, sure, had something interesting happen in their lives, but I don't really have anything to learn from them and are not written well. That being said, I gave 5 stars to 2 memoirs that I read this month, so take everything that I say with a grain of salt. I think in general I'm just like harder on memoirs than other forms of writing because I just don't know what's in it for me, and I'm selfish. Ha! All right. I'm drinking some green tea. This is out of a lovely mug that I actually got when I was working at the homeless shelter up in Boulder, and I love it. And every time I drink about it, it makes me think about that job, and that was probably my favorite job that I ever had until I became a doctor. All right. So, in the month of June, I read 13 books. What the actual fuck? That will literally never happen again, at least over the next 4 years. I read 13 books, and that was a total of 4,330 pages. Yeah, don't expect that to happen. Don't expect that to keep happening. Of the genre, so I read 2 historical fiction, 3 sci-fi / fantasy, 3 literary fiction, 1 thriller / horror, 1 romance, and 3 memoirs / nonfiction. Of the authors that I read in June, 10 were female, 1 was male, and 1 was non-binary. I read 7 novels by BIPOC authors, so that's Black, Indigenous, or people of color, and 5 LGBTQIA authors. I gave 6 books 5 stars, 4 books 4 stars, 2 books 3 stars, 1 book 2 stars, and I didn't have any I had 0 1-star books. In general, because this channel is very new, I guess I'll go into my scoring system. A 1 I literally only give if a book really pissed me off and I think that there are some really horrible things in it that will probably be hurtful to people if they read it. So that I almost never give. A 2 is generally given to a book that I just find kind of like boring and like not that good, like didn't really enjoy reading it and kind of feel like I wasted however many hours of my life on it. But it's not necessarily, it's just like I'm just kind of like, well, that was a waste of time. 3 is generally like, I liked it, didn't like blow my mind and like make me rethink everything, but like it was pretty good. 4 is like, damn, that made me think things and made me, it really was beautiful and I loved it. And 5 is like, holy shit, this book is everything. I absolutely loved it. It made me feel things. It made me see the world in a different way. And honestly, the like 4 to 5 stars is very subjective, and I feel like if I went back, I might like change things around fairly frequently. But that being said, let's jump in. So, the first book that I read in June was The Nightingale by Kristin. Holy shit. This book made me like ugly cry. I was sobbing, but it was like tears of sadness and tears of joy together at the same time. This book is about 2 sisters in World War II, living in Paris slash out slash like the countryside of France, and how they decide to subvert the Nazi regime in their own way. I thought that I had read everything that I needed to read about World War II. It is something that I got really, really into after I lived in Central Europe for a year, and obviously that part of Europe is surrounded by history of World War II because it is where essentially all of the death camps were. It was occupied during World War II, and so there's just a lot of rich history there. And so I was kind of like, I don't really think I need to read this anymore. Completely wrong. This book blew my mind. 5 out of 5 stars. I lost my shit. It was incredible. The next book I read was Wilder Girls by Rory Power. I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars. It was interesting to read during a pandemic because it is a queer book about an all-girls boarding school and the terrible illness that befalls them, and about them trying to survive together. It has a lot of like Lord of the Flies type stuff going on. It is super interesting, very creepy, especially during this time, but was also just kind of like meh. I think that it is a YA story, and so it was probably just something that I didn't find to be like totally earth-shattering. But it was great. It was good. The next book I read was The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abidare. This book I gave 4 out of 5 stars. It was gorgeous and had some of the most interesting character development that I have ever experienced in my life. This is the story about a young girl named Aduni who's living in Nigeria, and it is about her escape from her small village and marriage to an abusive man, and her journey towards trying to get an education. It was such a beautiful novel. I really enjoyed reading it. I have never been to Nigeria, but I did live in Tanzania, and they are far from one another. One of my biggest pet peeves is that people think Africa is like a place, and it is a huge continent, but this did remind me a lot and bring me back to my host families that I lived with in Tanzania, not because they were like abusive or anything, but just because it had like a very similar feeling, and hearing her like talk about cooking and things like that made me really think about my beautiful and amazing host mother that I lived with when I was in Tanzania. This is a lovely novel. I think one thing that I really, really love about it is that as Aduni evolves in her education, the prose evolves with her. And so it is a really beautiful and subtle way to have this character grow, and something that I've actually never experienced before. So, The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abidare. 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was... And sorry, I don't have copies of all of the books because I get a lot of them from the library. So I'll put little pictures up. But the next book that I read was Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste. This was a great book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I found it very interesting, very compelling. Pretty much everybody knows what this one's about, but really quickly, it is about a single mother who moves to a suburban town, and the chaos that ensues after she goes there and ruffles the feathers of all of the families that are living there. I thought that this book was really beautiful and really subtle, and a kind of slow burn thriller / contemporary novel. It is way better than the Hulu show. The Hulu show, I'm sorry to say, I hated it. I thought that they changed a lot of things from the book that made the characters less likable, and I just don't know why they did that. The next book that I read is So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. And this book I gave 5 out of 5 stars. The thing that I really loved about this book is that Ijeoma really puts stories from her own life And I found it to be so beautiful, and so, like, sharing those things feels, oh, I wanted to say thank you to her, because it is such an intimate thing to share, and it's such a hard topic, and she is just incredibly brave to feel comfortable enough sharing about her own life. And the other thing that I really, really loved about this book is it gave like action items of like things you can do and ways you can be different. And I love that. I thought that it's really, really interesting. It's a really quick read. It's really important. I recommend that book to anyone and everyone. So yeah, 5 out of 5 stars. So amazing. The next book is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I absolutely loved this book. I also sobbed. I gave this book, I can't remember, 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 5. Let me look. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. It was great. It is about a very, very famous woman in Hollywood in like the 1950s through current day, and about what she had to do to get famous and the many men and women that were in her life. And it was absolutely gorgeous. I really loved it. I was really compelled by the story. And normally I don't really care that much about like famous characters, but for some reason this was beautiful. Read it for Pride Month. Highly recommend. When you read it, you'll know why. The next book I read was In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is a memoir about Carmen's same-sex abusive relationship that she was in, and it was gorgeous. It is a memoir, and I normally hate memoirs. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The thing is I would not recommend this to everyone, and the reason why is it made me really uncomfortable to read. And I say that because her writing is so beautiful and so vivid that when you're reading it, it truly feels like you are being abused in this abusive relationship. It really brings you into the feeling of what it's like. I don't even know, I'm clearly not eloquent about this at all, but it feels like you're in an abusive relationship when you're reading it in a very weird way, and it feels so intimate and almost as though you shouldn't be reading it, like you're reading someone's journal entries. It was gorgeous. Highly recommend. 5 out of 5 stars. Just absolutely beautiful. The next book I read was The Wedding Date by Jasmine Guillory, so this was quite the departure. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars because it was just pure fun, but it wasn't like blowing me away, making me feel things. It was just fun. It's like reading a really amazing rom-com, and I highly recommend. It essentially follows a man and a woman who meet in an elevator, and he is going to the wedding of his ex-girlfriend and asks her to come along to kind of give him moral support and about their romance that ensues. It is really wonderful because it has a diverse set of characters and it's really fun, but it wasn't mind-blowing. I mean, it's a romance, so it's very, very fun to read, but isn't going to make you like change the way you see the world. So that's why it's 3 out of 5 stars. But for romance, 3 out of 5 stars is very good. The next book I read, I feel like I'm going to get some hate for this, but I read Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, and I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. I just really didn't think it was that interesting, didn't enjoy reading it, thought it was a waste of time. I feel really mean saying all this because I think some people really loved it, but I love fantasy, I love thriller, I love horror, and it just didn't do it for me. I thought it was really boring, and I also just think like the whole like rich white kids at Yale trope, like I just don't care. I just can't I feel like it's already been done. Like, you have Secret History, if we were villains, like that story has been told, and there are a lot of other stories that haven't been told, and I just like don't really care about it. So I don't know. I just like can't really get behind like reading about rich white kids. I just don't think they're that interesting. Even though the main character is not a rich white kid, she's poor, but she's living in this world with a bunch of rich white kids and everybody else. It's like all about the secret societies at Yale. So I don't know. It just is not that interesting to me. Anyway, the next book I read was absolutely incredible. It was The Deep by River Solomon. I actually listened to this audiobook, and it's narrated by David Jones, who is part of the rap group that this book was part of the rap group that wrote a song called The Deep that this novel was inspired by. And so it was a very like coming like full circle type experience. And oh my gosh, David Diggs, beautiful. His narration is gorgeous. And this book is just beautiful. I don't really have anything else to say about it, but that it made me feel things. It made me see the world in a different way. It is the story about slaves that were thrown overboard while they crossed the Atlantic, and especially pregnant slaves who were thrown overboard as they crossed the Atlantic, and about how they gave birth to this people that became mermaids. And it is such a beautiful retelling and a really interesting depiction of multi-generational trauma, and I loved it. It was amazing, and I highly recommend it. It also was great because it's obviously a very diverse set of characters, but also very diverse in that it's very queer. There are some people who are trans, some people who are, or mermaids who are non-binary. They're all intersex, and it is just a really interesting story, and it's just absolutely beautiful. So highly recommend. The Deep by River Solomon was incredible. The next was How We Fight for Our Lives by Saeed Jones. I told you that I read 2 memoirs and gave them both 5 out of 5 stars. This is this incredible memoir about a young black man growing up in the South who's gay, and it is funny and touching and incredibly intimate. I know I've said that like multiple times this week, or during this journal, but it made me feel things, and I learned, and it also just made me like literally laugh out loud on multiple occasions. And the fact that you can like laugh out loud and cry in the same book, it is a very rare thing. And so yeah, it was absolutely gorgeous. I highly recommend. Only 2 more books. The next book that I read was The Guest List by Lucy Foley. This I gave 4 out of 5 stars. It just came out. It is a thriller / horror, but more on the thriller side, about a murder that happens right after a wedding or during a wedding on a remote island during a storm in Ireland. And I won't say anything more because I think that thrillers are best when you go in knowing very little, but I will just say that I was very surprised when I found out with the twists at the end, and it was just such a fun read with multiple point of views, and the feeling, I don't know, I just felt like I was in the rain on this like murky island that is only inhabited by these people, and the whole time you're like, not only who murdered the person, but also like who's dead. I don't know. It's great. Highly recommend. And the last book I read was another Kristin Hannah. I read 2 of her novels this month, but I read The Great Alone by Kristin Hannah. I loved this book. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, It is about a young woman who is in Alaska, it's about a young woman whose family comes to Alaska to sort of escape the trauma that they have where they're from. So her father is a Vietnam War veteran. He was a prisoner of war and has a lot of PTSD, a lot of anger and violence that he brings home after the war, and it's about their life. I thought that it was a really interesting portrayal of family and love and abuse, and was a beautiful backdrop, and I particularly loved the set of characters that surround this family. I actually think that there's a lot to dislike about the family themselves, and all of the characters are very flawed, but I thought the community that they move to and that they learn from in Alaska is gorgeous, and the depictions of Alaska are beautiful. It made me cry for sure, and it was a fun read. Fun is not a good word. It was not a fun read. It was an entertaining read and a beautiful read. So yeah, 4 out of 5 stars. All right, so that is my June wrap up. It was a really good reading month, and please don't expect me to read this much ever again, because now I'm a doctor and I have very little time.